much less so now. Now it's becoming more or less like Britain, and a kind of a junior partner does it, the lieutenant does what it's told. Can it be different? Of course it can be different. Can Slovakia be different? Certainly. Europe, for example, doesn't have to be just an adjunct to the United States. Europe as a whole, has an economy comparable to the U.S., educated population more so than the United States, comparative standard, health and welfare standards, educational standards, pretty much better than the United States. There's only one dimension in which the U.S. is overwhelmingly powerful, namely the military dimension. The U.S. does outspend the rest of the world on combined on military intelligence, has hundreds of military bases all over the world, and it intends to be a global sovereign, just as it did during the Second World War, following the principles that I mentioned. Now, Europe has a choice. It's had a choice since the early 1950s. It can agree to be subordinate to U.S. power, just integrated into it, follow what it's to do, or it can move on an independent path, become an independent actor in world affairs. It doesn't need a huge military force. Its economic and social forces can succeed, just as China is doing without a military force. Europe can do it much better. Will Europe do it? Well, that depends on members of the European community. Slovakia, for example. They have to, they could, in fact, came close to, Czech Republic came close to blocking the Lisbon Treaty. Slovakia and other small countries could play a role in helping to move the European Union to become an independent force, and not just a lieutenant in the U.S.-run NATO military system and economic system. So sure, they can do a lot of things. In fact, we see them do it. But Ireland and Czechoslovakia practically blocked the Lisbon Treaty. Okay, that shows what small countries can do. And it can be constructive, it doesn't have to be negative.
Okay, there is question number 14. How much time do we have? Yes, you are looking at the watches. How much time do we have?
How much time do we have?
Minus 5 minutes.
Okay. Fine.
I take one more question.
Okay.
So pick one question.
So let's look at the question number 14.
The question about civil liberties. That's one respect in which the United States gets quite high grades. So, for example, freedom of speech is protected in the United States to an extent beyond any other country I know of. Now, that is not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Constitution. In fact, it wasn't true for most of U.S. history. But in the 1960s, in the context of popular activist movements, like the Civil Rights Movement, in that context, and that, incidentally, is how positive changes take place. They're not gifts from above. But in the context of the Civil Rights Movement, the Supreme Court set quite a high standard for freedom of speech beyond any country that I know of. And it went on in the next few years to go even beyond. And that's pretty well observed. So if you have any degree of privilege in the United States, and that's a lot of people, your rights are pretty well protected. On the other hand, if you don't have privilege, it's terrible. I mean, the U.S. has by far the highest incarceration rate in the world, 5 to 10 times as high as any European country. And not because there's more crime, there isn't any more crime. It has more prisoners in the world than any other country. And that's directed against the poor and mostly black and Hispanic. It's a way of imprisoning the black population. And if you look at African American history, I don't have time to run through it, but it's almost completely been a history of slavery with a few breaks, very small number of breaks. And now the black population, African American population, is being pretty much enslaved through the prison system. The mechanism for that is the drug war, which is a complete farce. It has nothing to do with drugs. It has to do with, in fact, that's kind of obvious. the most dangerous substance by a large measure, huge measure, is tobacco. The next most dangerous substance is alcohol. And both of them harm others, not just the person who takes them. They're much worse than hard drugs, certainly much worse than marijuana, cannabis. And in fact, it's well known from government studies that the best way to treat the drug problem, cheapest, most cost-effective, is prevention and treatment. But they don't do it. The drug war is just an excuse to imprison the, what are called the dangerous classes, the undesirables. In Latin American clients of the United States, they just kill them. It's called social cleansing. In the United States, they're thrown into jail. So yes, for them, there's civil rights are in horrible shape. Muslims suffer severely. But for the majority of the population, for people like me, say with some degree of privilege, civil rights are protected much more so than in Europe. I mean, I see it myself. If a book of mine is published in England, they have to have a battery of lawyers that go through it to make sure that there's not some phrase that could be used under Britain's disgraceful, shameful libel laws to punish and prevent freedom of speech. And that's even worse on the continent. So in this respect, the U.S. gets high marks, thanks to popular movements, largely the civil rights movement in this case.
Professor, thank you very much for your ideas, for your critical overview of U.S. foreign policy, for your critical overview of global problems. We, in this hall, some of us agree, some of us definitely disagree, but we were very privileged to have you here in Slovakia in this evening. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.